Periods 1, 5, 6. This is your first semester exam review video. So here's the process that I would ask that you do. I will display a problem. I will have you pause the video, and during that time I would like you to work the problem out. When you are ready, come back and I will show you the answer and kind of point out some things as we go through problems. All right, let's get started. All right, for problem number 1, you're going to graph y equals negative 1/4 x using slope-intercept form. And you'll want to use graph paper. So please get a piece of graph paper and go ahead and graph this problem. Okay, here's the answer for number 1, and I'm going to point out a few things. Remember, right here is the slope-intercept formula, and m is the slope, and b is the y-intercept. You always graph the y-intercept first, and it's on the y-axis, which is this one. And so I'm going to go to 0, so it's actually at the origin, and I'm going to put a point. And remember, you have to graph at least 3 points for your line. The slope, we go from the starting point, which is 0, 0, and we use rise over run. Remember, rise is the up and down, and the run is left and right. Okay, so from the starting point 0, we're going to go down 1, and we're going to go right 4. And we get our second point, and if we wanted to, we could do the same thing again, down 1, right 4, but I'm off my graph, so instead what I did the opposite. I went up 1, and I went left 4. Okay, so that is the answer to number 1. Okay, problem number 2 is find the slope of this line. All right, here's the answer to number 2, the slope. Remember, the slope formula is y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Remember, the numbers in the first parentheses are x1, y1, and the numbers in the second parentheses are x2, y2. So on the top of the formula, I put in 18 minus negative 12. On the bottom, I did negative 6 minus negative 3. When you do the integer rules and you add the opposite on top, that gives me 30. When I add the opposite on the bottom, that gives me negative 3. I have to reduce my answer to 10 over negative 1, or I would just take the answer of negative 10. Here's problem number 3. You're going to graph negative 4y plus 6x equals negative 12 using the slope-intercept form. And again, you're going to need graph paper for this problem. The answer to number 3 is the line that I have graphed. So the first thing we have to do is we have to transform this equation because it's not in slope-intercept form. So the first thing I did, remember I want to get y by itself, so I'm going to circle y just to show I want to get it by itself. So I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides. Remember, you can't take negative 12 minus 6x because they both don't have x's. So you get negative 6x minus 12. And I always write it in the same form as the formula, so I actually turned it and made it the x first, then the number. I brought down negative 4y. I want the y by itself, so if I want the y by itself, I have to get rid of that negative 4. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4 because it was multiply. Opposite of multiply is divide. Divide everything by negative 4. Negative 6 over negative 4 reduces to 3 over 2x. And negative 12 over negative 4 reduces to positive 3. So m is 3/2, b is 3. I'm going to graph the y-intercept first. So I go up to 3 on the y-axis and put a point. So here's my y-intercept. And then my slope is 3 over 2. So my 3 is my rise. My run is 2. So I'm going to go up 3 and I'm going to go right 2. So from my starting point 3, I went up 3, right 2. I could have done that again, up 3, right 2, or I could have gone down 3, left 2. Okay, so that's the line you should actually have. All right, problem number 4, we're going to find the slope of these 2 points. All right, here's the answer to number 4. Slope formula, m equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. I labeled my points, x1, y1, x2, y2. I plugged in my numbers, negative 3 minus 4 on top, Negative 16 minus negative 16 on the bottom. All right, next thing I have to do is I have to follow the order integer rules. So on the top, I'm going to add the opposite, and I get negative 7. And on the bottom, when I add the opposite, I get 0. So when 0 is on the bottom of the fraction, that's undefined slope. Remember, if 0 would have been on top of the answer, it would have been 0 slope. Problem number 5, you're going to solve this equation. Okay, on problem number 5, the original equation was negative 10 equals negative 2/3 x. So I have to multiply by the reciprocal. So that means, again, flip over the fraction. Whoops, flip over the fraction, 3 over negative 2. Make sure you do the same thing on this side. And don't forget there's a negative here. When I take 3 over negative 2 times negative 10 over 1, the 2 goes into the 10 5 times. I've got 2 negatives. That makes a positive. So 3 times 5 is 15. All right, problem number 6. Here's another equation to solve. Okay, on problem number 6, the first thing I am going to do, I'm going to put an imaginary 1 in front of this x. When I do the distributive property, negative 4 times negative 1 is 4x. Negative 4 times positive 6 is negative 24. 1/2 times negative 8x. Well, you need to imagine that there is a 1 underneath this 8. So 2 goes into 8 4 times. 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. So I have negative 4x. When I take 1/2 times negative 10, 2 goes into 10 5 times. 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. Next thing I did was I added 4x to both sides. Because it was a negative 4x, so I'm going to add 4x. I get 8x minus 24 equals negative 5. Add 24 to both sides. Divide by 8, and you get 19/8 as your answer. Problem number 7. Find the negative square root of 144 over 225. So the negative square root of 144 over 225, both of those numbers under the radical are perfect square roots. So the square root of 144 is 12, and the square root of 225 is 15. I have to make sure I put my negative on the answer. And then I need to realize that both of these are divisible by 3. So I divided both of them by 3, and I got negative 4/5 as my final answer. Problem number 8. Here's another equation to solve. Problem number 8. So the first thing I did was I need to move those fractions. So I'm going to subtract 1/2 x from both sides. Now when I take 2/3 minus 1/2, I have to get common denominators. So if you look over here, I did the work. 2/3 minus 1/2, common denominator is 6. So I have 4/6 minus 3/6, which is 1/6 x. Bring down minus 1/4. Bring down equals negative 6. These canceled out. I'm going to add 1/4 to both sides. So when I did this work, it's right here. I put negative 6 over 1 plus 1/4. Common denominator is 4. So I get negative 24/4 plus 1/4 is negative 23/4. At this point, I'm left with 1/6 x equals negative 23/4. I multiply both sides by the reciprocal, 6 over 1. And right here, I took a 2 out of the 4 and 6 to reduce. Negative 23 times 3 is negative 69 over, I have a 2 left on the bottom, so negative 69/2. Problem number 9, you're going to use order of operations and solve this problem. Problem number 9, let's see here. First thing I did was I did negative 5 squared, not in parentheses, so that's 5 times 5, 25, and then I put the negative on my answer, so negative 25. Next thing I did was I did negative 3 squared. That one is in parentheses, so that's negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. But notice I haven't used this minus sign, so I had to bring that down too. 6 minus 8 in parentheses is negative 2. Next thing I did was I took negative 3 times negative 8 or negative 6 and got positive 18. Then I took negative 2, which was in parentheses, and squared it. That gave me positive 4, and again, I haven't used this minus sign, so I have to bring it down. Next step, I have to take my division and do 18 divided by 3 is 6. Now I'm ready to work left to right, so negative 25 plus 6 is negative 19. Negative 19 minus 9, if I add the opposite, I get negative 28. Negative 28 minus 4, if I add the opposite, I get negative 32 is my final answer. Okay, problem number 10 is a fraction problem. Okay, on problem number 10, the first thing I did was I changed all the mixed numbers in proper fractions. So negative 3 and 2/3 is negative 11/3. 1 and 4/5 is going to be 5/4. And 5 and 1/6 is 31/6. Common denominator is 12. So negative 11/3 is negative 44/12. 5/4 is going to be 15/12. Negative 31/6 is going to be 62/12. I put the first two fractions together, negative 44 plus 15, different signs, so I subtract. I did that work right here. 45 minus 15 is 29. Because my negative was bigger, I got negative 29. I brought down minus 62/12. So this was a minus, and I changed it to add the opposite. That's why you see a negative here. Negative 29 plus negative 62, they're all negative, so I added them together and got negative 91/12. This one's kind of tricky. You may not realize it, but okay, I made a mistake right here. I apologize. This doesn't reduce. So the final answer, forget right here, is just negative 91/12. That doesn't reduce by 3. My fault. All right, moving on. Okay, here's problem number 11. Find the missing side. Round to the nearest tenth if necessary. Okay, on problem number 11, we have to use the Pythagorean theorem, and let's remember the Pythagorean theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, in the Pythagorean theorem, the two sides that make up the right angle are always your a and b. And then the side opposite the right angle is your hypotenuse, which is c. So I have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I plugged in 8 squared plus 12 squared equals c squared. 8 squared 64, 144, or 12 squared is 144. That comes out to be 208. You have to use your calculator to find the square root. Comes out to be c is 14.4 inches to the nearest tenth. Okay, problem number 12. Do the following measurements form a right triangle? 6 inches, 14 inches, 8 inches. Alright, so do they form a right triangle? Well, you have to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared, the Pythagorean theorem. You need to remember, if I give you 3 numbers, the longest one has to be the hypotenuse, because we talked about the hypotenuse is always the longest side. So c has to be 14. The 6 and the 8, doesn't matter which one's a and b. So I plug them in. 6 squared plus 8 squared equals 14 squared. 6 squared is 36 plus 8 squared 64. 14 squared is 196. 100 does not equal 196, so therefore it is not a right triangle. Okay, problem number 13. Find the missing side. Round to the nearest tenth if necessary. Okay, on problem number 13, finding the missing side, again, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, so this time we need to realize that we are finding a or b because we are finding one of the sides that make up the right angle. So we're finding one of the legs. The hypotenuse across from the right angle is c, so it's 21 inches. So I plugged in a squared plus 5 squared equals 21 squared. 5 squared is 25. 21 squared is 441. Solve the equation, subtract 25 from both sides, I get 441 minus 25 is 416. When I find the square root of both sides, I get a is 20.4 inches to the nearest tenth. Alright, problem number 14. We're going to evaluate our answer. So I told you what a, b, c, and d equal, and I told you the expression. So go ahead and solve the problem. Alright, so for problem number 14, the work is pretty long, but remember, anytime you plug in a negative number, you plug it in parentheses. So I have negative 3 cubed minus b is 4 times c is negative 2 times d is negative 4 plus, in the parentheses, I went ahead and used brackets because I had to use parentheses inside the parentheses. A is negative 3 minus c is negative 2, and then all of that is squared, minus c is negative 2 times negative 4. Okay, first thing I did on this problem was I did negative 3 cubed. Negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 is negative 27. Then I did inside the brackets negative 3 minus negative 2. When I add the opposite, that's negative 1. And then the next step, what I did was I took negative 4 times negative 2 and got positive 8. And I did negative 1 squared. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. And I also did negative 2 times negative 4 is 8. Okay, I still have another multiplication to do, so I took 8 times negative 4 is negative 32. Now I'm just ready to work left to right. Negative 27 plus negative 32 is negative 59. Negative 59 plus 1 is negative 58. Negative 58 minus 8, because you add the opposite, gives me negative 66. Okay, here's problem number 15. Find the square root of 2.56. Alright, so the square root of 2.56 is just 1.6. How do I know this? Well, 256 is 16, and then I know it's got to have something to do with 16. So if I want two numbers behind the decimal, remember you divide 2 by 1, and I need one number behind the decimal. So 1.6 times 1.6 is going to give me 2.56. Okay, here's problem number 16. Evaluate this expression. When E is 1/2, F is negative 3/4, G is 1/3, and H is negative 5/6. Alright, so what I did was I plugged in E is 1/2 times F is negative 3/4. On the bottom, G is 1/3 times negative 5/6, which is H. So on the top, when I take negative, or 1/2 times negative 3/4, nothing reduces. So 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. 2 times 4 is 8. So negative 3/8. Bottom, nothing reduces. So I get negative 5/18. Now remember, this sign right here stands for division. So I put negative 3/8 divided by negative 5/18. Division of fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. So I did negative 3/8. Flip over the second one to 18 over negative 5. I did some cross canceling. The 8 became a 4, the 18 became a 9. I had two negatives, that makes a positive, so I end up with 3 times 9 is 27, 4 times 5 is 20, 27/20ths. Okay, problem 17, we're going to solve another equation. Alright, so problem 17, when I did this two different ways. The first side, which is over here, I added 9a to both sides. And I got 2 equals 6a. Divide both sides by 6, and I get a is 1/3. On the other one, over here, I added 3a to both sides, and I got negative 9a plus 3a is negative 6a plus 2, and then I have to remember on this side I've got to put a 0. I subtracted 2 from both sides. I got negative 6a equals negative 2. Divide both sides by negative 6, and I got the answer of 1/3 when I reduce. Okay, problem number 18, you have two equations to solve. A is negative 3x plus 4 equals 4 minus 3x, and B is 2a minus 2 equals 2a minus 6. Both of these represent two special cases that may be a hint as you solve them. Alright, so on the left side, when I take negative 3x plus 4 equals 4 minus 3x, and I add 3x to both sides, I end up with the x's canceling out, and I end up with 4 equals 4, which is a true statement. So that's all solutions or infinitely many solutions. It depends on how the answer is written. On the second side, I subtracted 2a from both sides, and when I did that, the a's canceled out, and I got negative 2 equals negative 6, which is a false statement, so that means that problem has no solutions. Remember, these are your two special cases in equations. Okay, problem number 19. Read the problem, decide what to do, and solve it, please. So problem number 19, a ladder is leaning against a wall. So I drew my wall. 14 feet tall. So here's my wall. Whoops, here's my wall. And the ladder is 28 feet long. So I made sure my ladder was 28 feet. How far from the bottom of the wall does the bottom of the ladder need to be placed? So we're trying to find out this space right here. So there's my, how far is this away from the wall? Okay, so we have to use Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The two sides that make up the right angle are the wall and how far the ladder is away from the wall. So we've got 14 squared plus b squared equals the length of the ladder squared, 28 feet squared. So I get 196 plus b squared equals 784. At this point, I didn't show the actual work, but I subtracted 196 from both sides. And I got 784 minus 196 is 588. Square root of 588 is 24.2 feet to the nearest tenth. Problem number 20. I gave you a line. You have to tell me what is that line that's graphed. Find it in slope-intercept form. Alright, so on problem number 20, we want to write the equation in slope-intercept form. So we need to remember we are not done until we find the answer to y equals mx plus b. So the first thing I know is I know that this is my y-intercept. So what number is that? That's -2. So that -2 is my b. And then I got to figure out the slope. And I can do it one of two ways. I can count the slope, or I can use the points and use the slope formula. So one way to do this problem is count the slope. So I would go from here and I would rise, how far? Up 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's +4. And I would go right, I'm here, and I go right, how many? 3, so +3, so my slope is 4/3. Or, I know this point is 3, 2, and I know this point is 0, -2. So if you notice down here at the bottom, I wrote them down, 3, 2, and 0, -2. I wrote them down here too, so I used the slope formula, -2 minus 2 over 0 minus 3, and I also get the slope of 4/3. Now you don't have to do both those ways, you can do the way you want, but no matter which way I find the slope goes in for m, so the equation is y equals 4/3 x minus 2. Okay, problem 21, find the slope of this line. Okay, problem 21, you've got all kinds of possibilities because I have 4 different points on that line that I could use. I chose the top and the bottom one, so I used -3, 5, 6, -1, and I actually did the slope, and I took -1 minus 5 over 6 minus -3, and I got -6/9, which reduces to -2/3. The other option I could have done was, and I did this right here, actually I'm going to use a highlighter for this just to show this. I did rise over run, so I went down 2 and I went right 3. So I get the slope -2/3 no matter which way I find the slope. Okay, 22. Find the equation of the line graphed in slope-intercept form. Okay, on problem number 22, if I want to find the equation that's graphed in this picture, first thing I know is I know it crosses the y-axis at 0, 0, so I know my y-intercept is 0. And then, let's see, I need to know what my slope is. So one way I could do it is I could count the slope from the top to the bottom. That's down 5 and right 6. So that slope is -5/6, rise over run. Or I could use the 2 point 0, 0, 6, -5, and I could actually use the slope formula. But -5 minus 0 over 6 minus 0 is also -5/6. So either way, so I plugged in my y-intercept of 0 and I plugged in my slope -5/6, and I get the answer of y equals -5/6x plus 0. I don't need to write the 0, so my final answer is just y equals -5/6x. Okay, that ends the review session for the math exam, so hopefully that has helped you get ready for the exam. If you have any questions, let Mrs. Jennings know. Have a good day.